Hello, my name is Charles Upton, and this is yet another in my series of little videos on different books, most of which I wrote, not all of which, but most. At this point, today, I'm doing a book called The Science of the Greater Jihad, Essays in Principial Psychology. If you can see where that picture is, that's a Gustave Doré print from his illustrations of the Divine Comedy of Jacob wrestling with the angel. Yeah, I debated whether I was going to call it Science of the Greater Jihad because I figured I might go in the, Homeland Security search engine, it'd pop up. I probably did, but I think I want to retain the use of the word jihad for a different meaning than simply mindless violence. In Islam, the Greater Jihad, for those who do not know, is the struggle against oneself, against one's subhuman impulses. It's the struggle to become a full human being. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and his companions at one time were returning from one of their campaigns, and he said to them, well, now we return from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad. And they said, well, what's the greater jihad? We just came out of battle. What could be greater than that? And he says, the war against the soul, or we say, the war against the self. In this case, soul doesn't quite mean the same thing as it does in the West. It means against the ego. Against the ego. So what I'm trying to do in this book is remarry psychology and metaphysics. All traditional spiritual paths and all religions have their own metaphysical psychologies. And there's a vast literature on this, which has largely been neglected and lost. And after this was lost, then people like Freud and Jung came along and said, well, let's reinvent this from scratch. And they came up with some interesting things, some things which are valid on a level. But to the degree that they do not recognize that the human psyche is an expression of a metaphysical order on a lower level, there's an eternal, celestial, metaphysical order of truth, and the reflections of this order in this world, in the waters of the human psyche, that's where you get the human's psychological life and what we are as subjective beings, with our own experiences. Our subjective experience exists within a greater context, which is entirely objective and transpersonal and beyond us entirely. And if that were not true, there's no way we could get beyond ourselves, get beyond our ego. The spiritual path would be impossible because there would be no objective reality to which we could come into relationship and finally realize that's beyond our own ego, our own self-referential subjectivity. That's why you can't really have, I say, a transpersonal psychology without an understanding of an objective metaphysical order. And I'm trying to say this to the transpersonal psychologists, and we'll see what they say in return. I have no idea, but that will be coming. So this book, just read you quickly the chapter title so you get some vague idea of what I'm up to. Actually, I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to pick a few. There's one called The Tripartite Human Psyche in Fall and Restoration. What does that mean? Well, the major faculties of the human psyche are thought, feeling, and will. Now, in the normal human psyche, in the psyche where these are in the correct hierarchical relationship, first, and there's something beyond the psyche, too, within us, which is, Meister Eckhart said, there's something within the human soul that is uncreated and uncreatable, and that is the intellect. So this is the spark of divinity within us. It's what the Greeks call the nous. It's what the Sufis and Arabs call the al-ruh. Greeks also would call it pneuma. And this is eternal and transpersonal. It's the eternal transpersonal point within us. It's not part of the psyche, but the whole psyche proceeds from it. And so, in relation to that point, the three faculties of the psyche, when they are correctly hierarchicalized, go like this. Thought turns to the nous, turns to the intellect to see what is always true, and then thinks on that basis. And then the will sees what thought has determined to be true based upon its understanding of the intellect, and obeys what thought tells it to do. This is where the rational mind informs the will as to what it is supposed to will. And then thirdly, the energy necessary for this, because it takes a great deal of energy to will to do what the rational mind tells you to do, as anyone knows. Just be rational, just be sensible. It's easier said than done. So what's required is the third function, which is feeling, which is energy, emotional energy, will come in and empower the will to obey what thought and rationality tells it to do, and based upon what thought and rationality have discerned in the eternal spiritual intellect. Now that is the normal human soul. That's the unfallen human soul. When the human soul falls, what happens? Well, let's say feeling is no longer at the bottom of the hierarchy, but is at the top. You have feelings, you have impulses, you get interested in something. Something is attracting you. You think, that's interesting, and then you start to desire it, and then the feeling goes to the will and says, come on, let's do it. This is exactly what Eve did when in the Garden of Eden, the serpent came to her and said, look, eat this apple and you'll be like God. And so she eats it and she says, look, Adam, you have some too. So this is the affections, drawing the will astray. And then finally, what comes last instead of first is the rational mind, which is used for only two purposes. One, to figure out ways to get what the affections tell the will it must will, to figure out strategies for the fulfillment of blind desire. And secondly, it comes into play in order to rationalize this way of living, to come up with theories that how this is okay. Actually, though, this is what happens when the human soul falls into chaos and vice, and this creates chaos in society. So that's what that's about. I'm going to do that one, and there's one other section here. One other section, and there's a lot more to it than this, but this is called, one is called "Can Jung Be Saved?" A Suffic revisioning of the Jungian archetypes. Just want to mention that because I think Jung, his basic view of reality was false because he denied that there was an objective and eternal metaphysical order, which happens to be the case, but he didn't understand that. On the other hand, what he came up with, what he actually discovered in his investigations of the psyche is extremely interesting and potentially of the greatest value if it's put in the right context, which means if it's understood metaphysically. Try and attempt to do. But the other section I want to mention here is, this is called Love and Knowledge in the Field of Spiritual Combat, a comparison of the Sufi teachings of Javad Nurbakhsh and Fritjof Schuon. Fritjof Schuon is, who passed away in, I think, 1999, one of the greatest metaphysicians for actually many centuries in the West. I do not agree with everything he said, and I think he made some errors, but I think to read his many books will only repay anyone who wants to develop a sacred worldview, understand what metaphysics is and what its import is. There's no one like Fritjof Schuon. And Javad Nurbakhsh was before he passed away a couple of years ago, was my Sufi master. And he taught, what you would say, classical Persian Sufism, and he had more of the operative sense of what the spiritual path is. And whereas Fritjof Schuon has more the metaphysical, aesthetic, theoretical sense of what the spiritual path is. So I try to bring these two together to learn, so each can inform the other, and we can in the process, learn more about what the spiritual path is and about how the human psyche can be conformed to its archetype in God, because that's what the spiritual path is all about. And it's an attempt to reach what I call a kind of ideal normalcy. And all psychology in traditional religions and esoteric schools is oriented toward that goal. And it isn't simply an instance of every once in a while having a peak experience and seeing beyond, the materialism and seeing bigger worlds. So that's part of it. But it's much more a science and a method. That's why I call my book Science of the Greater Jihad. So the one thing that I probably contributed to that study in that particular chapter is the idea of what we do with our primal feelings. I am someone who's had great difficulty with the feeling realm, maybe because I'm a thinking, intuitive type. So feelings come as sometimes difficulties. And let's say the primal feelings, in one way of looking at it, are anger, fear, depression, sadness, and what's the other one? Depression. It's not depression. I'm forgetting this. It's anger, fear. And I'll remember it while I go along. Okay. The way to deal with anger is to say, if you experience anger, God is telling you that you must do something or refrain from doing something right now. So obey. That's the way to transform anger into strength. Fear is God telling you, in the last analysis, I exist and you do not. This is what God said to St. Catherine of Siena, I believe it was. He says, I am he who is, you are she who is not. And that's truly the essence of Sufism right there. And when the reality, the truth that God is the only reality comes, and the understanding that you are not, that produces fear. Well, embrace that fear and let yourself be annihilated. That's what God wants of you in that case. Hurt, that's the fourth one. Hurt is the sense that you're being jerked around. You expect, you're being teased. You're given an expectation. That expectation is dashed. Always, you expect someone to call you, they don't call you. You expect someone to love you, they hate you. You expect this and that happens. You're always you're always getting hurt. And what this is essentially God telling you, to give into His will in the changes of life. To be like, as the Sufis say, a corpse in the hands of the washer of the dead. When hurt comes, understand that God is way beyond you. He inflames desires in you that apparently He's making it impossible for you to fulfill. And so the way out of that is submission to the changes that He's putting you through in trust in the Lord. That's how to get through hurt. And sadness is the sense that everything is lost already. Life is lost. All the good of life is lost. Everything is gone, and it's in some other world. But how can we ever get to that world? Well, we deal with sadness by taking a look at that other world, seeing the distant beauty of God, the distant reality of life as we wish it to be, far away from this world, and letting that nostalgia draw us to that higher world. So we die to this world, which is dead anyway, and we open to that other world, which is coming to us as the face of mercy. So, anyway, this is my attempt to remarry psychology and metaphysics. If you buy my book, you can get back to me and tell me how you think I did.